want me to say too much about him because he's going to sort of say a bit about himself, but apparently I'm allowed to say the following things, which are that Graham is an ex-head teacher, he's now an Ofsted inspector, and he's an independent consultant who advises schools and trains leaders. He's also a human being. He wanted me to add that in. Who's looking forward to a lovely holiday in a couple of weeks in New England to see the fall. So I'll let Graham fill you in on more of who he is. But thank you very much for coming, Graham, after an incredibly busy week. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Right, thank you. Will these microphones pick me up if I don't hold them? No, right, okay. Before I start, how many people were here last year? Quite a few. And I suspect that some of you will have had a look at the website and seen last year's keynote talk, which was given by Nikki Powell. Because this is a place in which we got lots of people who are praying, can I ask you to pray for Nikki, please? Nikki's been going through a really tough time. Her husband had melanoma, has been operated on, I'm not sure how many times. Things haven't been going well, and they felt really very much under the cosh for the last few months. There are critical days coming up, and I think it would be really good if you could remember her and pray for her and her family. They're all feeling at a pretty low ebb. They've got an older son who's just started university, children going through exams, and Duncan, who's normally at life and soul of the party, is just feeling very, very low. So I think it's worth mentioning that as we start. Listening to where people came from, 5 hours from Cornwall, I thought it almost took me 5 hours from Slough this morning, because I stayed overnight, and I've got the wrong slide up to start off with, so we're not there. So, my name is Graham Sims. You've had a little bit of an introduction. I've distinguished myself in your company by being the only person who's worn a suit. And so I've taken my jacket off, and I was going to take my tie off, but I have spotted one other tie, so I'm not going to leave that. I'm not going to leave that person on their own for the moment. For the moment. But it will come off in a while. Right. Okay. So we're going to start off with a question. Why are you here? Why are you here? And I want to pose a question which I want you to reflect on as we go through the first part of what I have to say. And that is, what difference do you think you could make to the life and the hope and the aspirations of young people and their development? So just think about that and reflect on it as we go through this first part of the day. Now, we already know that there are quite a number of teachers here. So it's always good to know who you're actually talking to. So how many head teachers have we got here? One or two, right. I've been a head teacher. I've been head of 2 schools. Any senior managers in schools apart from head teachers? Any teachers? Right, teachers, teaching assistants, other people who work in schools. So we've got quite a few. I think it is really important that those of you who are teachers are under no illusion that you can have a phenomenal impact on the life of young people, in the things that you do, in the things that you say, and in the things that you organise and allow to happen in your school. I went through a sort of male crisis point on the 1st of September, because I realised that it was 40 years ago on the 1st of September that I actually started teaching in this school, which was a boarding school, Worksop College in Nottinghamshire, 40 years ago. And a lot has happened since then. Last week, into my email inbox came an offer of getting this book free, Living the Dream, written by the Dean of Liverpool Cathedral, Canon Peter Wilcox. Peter was a member of the Bible study group that I used to run in Worksop College 40 years ago. Now, did we have any influence there? Did that have any impact on what he is doing now? I don't know. But I'm sure that it had some. I'm sure that it had some. Even if he came thinking that might be something that he was going to do, the very fact that when he went to school as a youngster 40 years ago, he was able to actually connect with a teacher who was a Christian, who encouraged and was able to build up in the faith, I think was hugely important. So that was Peter. We went to Florence a couple of years ago, and we went to the English church. It was on Good Friday, and as we walked in, there was a poster which said Worksop College Choir was going to be singing in the church on Easter Sunday. And I thought, that is a very odd coincidence that the school where I started teaching was sending its school choir. And so I buttonholed the vicar or the rector or whatever he was called at the end of the service, and I said, do you have anything to do with Worksop College? And he said, well, yes, I do, and I know you. And he was a member of my Bible study groups 40 years before, and had actually signed a commentary on Matthew, which was given to my wife and I when we got married a year into my teaching at Worksop College. So do we have an influence? We don't know. We never know. It took me 38 years to find out that actually for this young person, who at that stage I wouldn't have guessed had gone into the priesthood for him. Peter, I might have done, but we have an influence. So teachers who are here, please, you have a God-given calling in what you're doing. So anyway, right, that's teachers. I'm a teacher, I've been a teacher. Okay, people might not consider me a teacher at the moment. We'll go on to that in a minute. But I am at heart. Right, how many people here are parents? Wow, jolly good, fantastic. How many of you are grandparents? Jolly good, it's wonderful, isn't it? Right. Those of you who are parents, you must be under no illusion that you have the most profound impact on the lives of young people imaginable. I've got a family. There we are. There they are. I've got 4 children. I've got 2 sons-in-law, and I've got 4 grandchildren. And they're wonderful. We might tell you a little bit about them as we go on. So as we speak this morning, I'm speaking to you as a teacher and I'm speaking to you as a parent. How many church leaders have we got here? I know we've got some. I can see by the badge of that sort of necktie that goes around 1 or 2. Right, jolly good. Be under no illusion that as a church leader, you can have the most enormous impact and influence on the lives of people. By the things that you say, by the way that you are, by the things that you do, by the things that you run. I'm a church leader too. I'm an elder of a church. This is our church. It runs, it was a Brethren church. I don't think you would know that anymore. Started off in an old house. Building to the side is where we actually meet. And everybody's getting older. But it's a wonderful place because we've got... We run a holiday club each summer, and those are the folk who were engaged with that and helped out with it. And we've got people in our church who go out into schools. We had a youth worker who ran prayer spaces in schools. That's quite interesting because he ran prayer spaces in schools, I think, before prayer spaces actually started, which was but he's not with us anymore, but we do have activities like that, and we have people who go in and do Bible Explorer classes, and we know that it has an impact. We're all getting older, and one of the things, so if you pray for us, please pray that we will have some more younger folk coming along to actually carry on the work, because it's hugely important. So as I speak to you this morning, I'm speaking as a parent, as a teacher, and as a church leader. And how many school inspectors have we got here? Wonderful! I've got a colleague. Oh, right, I've made a friend. And you've got at least one, so you're all right. Well, actually, nobody normally wants to admit that they're a school inspector, or certainly not in certain companies. A few years ago, I went as a ski rep because I wanted to have a week skiing, and I used to take skiing trips abroad, and I thought this was a good way of getting a free holiday and enough pocket money to last the week. So I went as a humble ski rep. And I thought, well, I wonder how they're going to take to the fact of what I'm doing. I'm not going to say anything, so I didn't say anything at all. And they were getting very suspicious towards the end of the week because we joined in some of the conversations with the staff and so on. And on the coach on the way back, just before I got off, one of them said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, actually, I inspect schools." And their faces sort of dropped. And well, there we are. I mean, what's the difference between a school inspector and a terrorist? You can negotiate with the terrorists, yes. And, well, actually, I think it's important that you know that there are people out there who do go into schools to inspect who are actually human beings. So what I'm saying today is influenced to a very large extent by what I see as I go into schools. I've been going into schools to inspect them for 19 years now. I've lost count of the number of schools I've been into, but it's a very large number. It's a great privilege to be able to go into schools and see what's happening. And it is wonderful to go into schools and to be able to come out and encourage people at the end of the day when they're doing a good job. And I know that there are a lot of people up and down the country who actually have been buoyed up and have been enthused because of feedback they've received when they've been inspected. And I know that sadly there are some of those who've been discouraged because of the feedback they've had. I've had a difficult week. I was inspecting a children's centre this week and we had to tell them that they were inadequate, and that's not an easy message to give. It's hard. But actually, we've got to give those messages when they're the right messages to give, because we're involved with the lives of children. And here's the common thread that's running through all of these things. Whether you're here as a parent, as a church worker, as a volunteer, as a teacher, whatever your role, I hope that the common thread is that you are wanting the very best for young people, the young people you're working with. We want to live in a world where there's peace and harmony, where people get on well with each other. We want our young people to grow up in a world where they feel happy and fulfilled. That is highly embarrassing because that is my phone, yes. I don't ever have it on. I always just flick the button on the side, if you would. It's on the side. It's a jolly good. On that side. Now you know I've got a good ringtone, so there's that is awful. I stand up in front of people so many times. I said, please make sure your phones are switched off. And actually, I always have it switched off. It's a new phone. So yesterday I was coming up in the car and I'd asked somebody to phone me at 6 o'clock. And the phone rang at 6 o'clock. And it said the number. I thought, that's my number. So I was calling me and the phone was ringing in the car. And I thought, how on earth does that happen? So I've got a nice mystery to sort out. I haven't quite mastered the phone. Anyway, right, okay. The common thread is that we're working with young people, and young people are just so important. They're our future. You've got children. We want our children to be able to grow up in a world where they can live and get on with each other, where they can know that they've got a Heavenly Father who loves them and cares for them and wants the very best for them. And we want them to know Him, and we want them to grow up in that knowledge. And how many do? because actually we're living in a fallen world. We're living in a world which sees so many children who are desperate, who are living in conditions which we just wouldn't imagine, where refugees are multiplying by the day, where there's war and bitterness and hatred. And so what I want to do as our focus of this first session is to tell you about three people. Well, actually, it's three groups of people. And through them to illustrate how you as a group and how you individually might have an impact. But to think about these people and to think about their different needs and how, through prayer spaces, you might be able to help them and have an influence on them and have an impact on their lives. The first person is actually two people, a boy and a girl, Abby and Ben. You wouldn't tell it from that photograph, but Abby is actually 10 and Ben is 8. They had their birthdays last week. Abby, the smaller one, is the older one. They are lovely children. They're happy. They're naughty at times. They squabble and they fight, and that's what all children do. But if you want to characterize them, you see the smile on their faces, and that is how they are. They've got loving parents. They've got parents who care for them and look after them and see to their needs and make sure that they're clothed and they're housed and they're well fed, and who teach them how to behave themselves well, good table manners, knowing when to say please and thank you. They give them experiences. They take them out and they do things with them. They walk in the country. They go on holiday together. They go and find bugs under rocks, and they go blackberry picking, and they do all sorts of things which engage with their children. This summer and the summer before, both of them went to holiday club, and both of them sat and listened and expressed interest and said that they want to follow Jesus. Abby reads her Bible and reads Top's notes. Their parents take them to church, and you probably guessed that these are two of my grandchildren. Well, you might have seen their picture before and tied them up together. They're the fortunate ones. Life's good for them because of what their parents have provided, what God has provided for them, and they're fortunate. But they're living in a disparate world because they have to go off to school. And what do they find when they go to school? They're in classes where probably, possibly, nobody else goes to church. Nobody else comes from a Christian home, where the head isn't a Christian, there aren't any Christian teachers, and yet the school has to cater for their spiritual development. Always seems a bit hard, that to me. How do you cater for spiritual development when you're not spiritually developed yourself? I think that's a little bit difficult. And they're subject to all the pressures that you have in school. Their friends do different things. Some of them come from similar homes, others come from very different homes. But all the pressure on them is to do what their friends do, which is different from their upbringing and is different from the way that they are. So how good would it be if from time to time in their school they could find something happening in their school which is in line with what happens in their home life and in their church life, that actually they could see that school values these things as well, and that their friends can be interested in spiritual things as well. You see, very often we tend to forget the favoured ones, the ones who come from homes where we're brought up and our parents believe and we have every advantage. And sometimes we wonder why our children or our youngsters fall away and drop off. It's because there are so many competing pressures and we have so many inconsistent messages. And there are lots of other factors as well. But how good would it be if from time to time they experienced prayer spaces in their school? They had people to talk to who gave the same sort of answers that their parents give, the same sort of message that they hear when they go to church. I think it would be tremendous. What sort of difference can you make in the lives of people? What sort of difference can you make in the lives of Abby and Ben and the other children who come from homes which are supportive and homes who want their children to grow up knowing and understanding and developing a relationship with God? The second person I want to talk to you about is Jack. Jack's not his real name, and this isn't a real picture of Jack, because I don't have a picture of Jack, but Jack is a little boy who was 10 years old I met when inspecting a school. I saw him standing outside the deputy head's office. Now, normally that probably means he's done something wrong. And I didn't say anything, I walked on past. That was at the beginning of the day. When I went back later, he was outside the deputy head's office again. And I didn't say anything, I walked on past, I let the school get on with their business. But I walked back later in the day and he was there, so I had a conversation with Jack. Later in the day I found Jack in the school office talking to the secretary. And towards the end of the day he was in the deputy head's office again. Jack didn't know where he was going to sleep that night because his foster parents wouldn't have him there that night, and he didn't know who had been chosen to be his foster parents for that evening. And so he needed somebody to talk to. He needed somebody to be alongside him and to help him and to be the parent that he did have but didn't have. He saw his mother twice a week, so twice a week he would come from whichever foster parent he was in, and he'd lost count of the number of foster parents he'd had. And he would see his mother for a couple of hours, and she would maybe take him to McDonald's, or I can't remember exactly what he said they did, but he said it was very difficult because he didn't really know that she cared for him, and he had all sorts of questions going on in his mind as to if she was his mother, then why wasn't he with her? Why did he have to be with his foster parents and go off to a new home every now and again? And he had a younger brother, and he wasn't going to be with his younger brother that night. And at 4 o'clock he found out where he was going, and somebody came along and took him away, and he went off. Now fortunately, the next day he came back in, I saw him, and he said they were really nice and they were really helpful. But you see, for Jack, school is the best that he's got. For Abby and Ben, home is the best that they've got, and school is good, but actually could be a lot better. For Jack, school is the very best. That's his stability. And apart from school, he doesn't have anything. Now, Jack isn't an oddity. There are thousands of Jacks up and down the country. I went to another school where I was told to just be careful, because in this class there was a child who, if they saw a man, would likely to run off screaming. Why? Because that child's father had locked her into a van and set fire to this van with her in it. And you think, how can people do that? Another school I went into, and I looked at the list of children down there, and there were 30 children in the class, and of those 30 children, 29 were from broken homes, had problems, were living with single parents, had complex and difficult needs, and the teacher had to teach those 30 children and meet all of their needs. And it's hard. And it's hard. So how good would it be for Jack and the others like him that from time to time they have the opportunity to actually stop and ask and reflect, because actually they're reflecting all of the time. But they have no one to take them beyond where they are and to actually help them to understand that despite all of the problems and despite all of the difficulties, there is someone who loves and cares for them as well. So that's Jack. What influence could we have for him and for the others like him? And our third person and our last person is Chris. Well, I don't know what this guy's called, and I don't know who this guy is, but he's there as a teacher. He is my eclectic teacher. He's the person who I see as I go around so many schools. He went into teaching like so many people do, with wonderful intentions, wanting to do well for the children who are there and who he has to deal with day by day. We'll start off with Chris as a primary school teacher, and we'll change him into a secondary school teacher in a minute. He's got 30 children in his class, all of them very different. Some of them very bright, some of them really struggling. Some of them from homes which are supportive, like Abby and Ben, and then alongside them is Jack, who doesn't have a home to go to. And Jack's got all sorts of problems. And he causes problems in the class, and no wonder he causes problems in the class, wouldn't you, if that were how you were? And he's got all sorts of people in between that he's got to deal with. And that hits him hard. How am I going to deal with all of these people? How am I going to meet their needs? How am I going to actually ensure that all of them make progress in their learning? And then on top of that, I'm asked to look after their spiritual and their moral and their social and their cultural development as well. Well, I've got to teach them English and maths and history and geography and science and art and DT and music and a whole lot of other things. And I've got to plan all my lessons, and I've got to make sure that in every lesson that I do, everything's differentiated, so we meet this person's need and that person's need and that person's need. And then I've got to mark the books, and then I've got to write reports, and then I've got to respond to everything that else that happens. And then blooming Ofsted comes in as well. So it's hard. It's hard. And I've seen the pressures. I know what the pressures are. I've seen them. 3 of my children are teachers. My wife's a teacher. Jolly good, wonderful. Don't put your children off. It's a fantastic profession. And I've seen my eldest daughter and her husband, both of whom are primary school teachers, and they come to us very occasionally for the weekend. They live in Kent, we live in South Wales. And they bring tons of stuff with them, which they've got to do because Monday they've got to go back into school and they've got to do all of these things. Is it a surprise that 40% of new teachers leave the profession within 5 years because of all the pressures that there are on them? It's hard. And it's just the same in secondary school. So Chris becomes a secondary school teacher. Okay, he might only have 1 or 2 subjects to deal with, but all of the pressures are there, incessant pressures to meet this standard and that. And then he's got to deal with all of the behavioural issues and the low-level disruption which comes. No, it doesn't come in every school, but it comes enough to just wear you down again and again and again. And he's got to look after their spiritual development. How does he do that amongst everything else? How does he take time for Jack and help him, because Jack's a full-time need? How does he deal with Abby and Ben? Well, actually, he deals with Abby and Ben because they're okay. They behave themselves well. They come from a home which is supportive. So actually, they're left to get on with it. And he heaves a sigh of relief that at least in his class, he's got one person there who he doesn't have to cajole and who does what is asked. And then perhaps they don't get stretched as much as they should. And they don't get the time that they deserve. And neither do the ones in the middle. And it's not Chris's fault. It's just the way things are. And it's hard and it's difficult. So how good would it be for Chris if from time to time he had some help from others from outside to come in and help him deal with the spiritual development. Now, having said that, please don't think that every Chris you meet is going to jump up and say, "Oh, fantastic, thank you, coming, you're welcome," because actually what happens is it's another pressure for them as well. And we heard earlier on, didn't we? I got this document, it was too much for me, and I just got rid of it. And for some people, it's too much. I can't cope with anything else. I can't remember what it was now, but the other day, my wife came out with something, and I said, "I can't take that burden on as well." And she said, "What do you mean, burden?" And I said, "Well, actually, it's just something, I can't cope with that as well as everything else I've got to cope with." And some teachers won't be able to cope with it as well as everything else that they've got. But some will welcome, and some will love you to come in. They will welcome you with open arms, and they will come out with wonderful stories of what happens at the end. We've got a person in our church who goes out and takes assemblies in schools, and he comes back to church from time to time and tells us of responses and reactions. And I've seen them as I go around schools, that actually inside everybody knows that there is more to life than just SATs and grades and levels and exams, that we all have a deeper hankering after something which only God can fulfill. And what folk like you and folk like my friend Tony and the others in our church who go into schools do is they just start to open that door. The Bible studies which I used to run 40 years ago just open a door and help start that process. But it's important. So, what difference can you make to the lives of people? Can you make a difference to the lives of Abby and Ben and Jack and Chris? I think you can. A huge difference. What impact can you make in terms of the spiritual development of these youngsters? And also the teachers as well. Because you're showing them something more than they would normally get. You're showing them there's a depth which they don't receive in their training. You're showing them that actually, in terms of spiritual development, when we look at Ofsted's definition, it's a bit wishy-washy. It's not our definition of what spirituality is, but you're showing them a greater insight into what spiritual development really means. So I hope as you go through the day and as you look at the different activities and you think about the different things, you will just ask yourself, can I help make that difference? What impact can we have on the lives of Abby and Ben and Jack and Chris and all the other youngsters who are in our schools? It's so important.